After days and days of going through the best arguments for and against abortion, I've come up with what I believe to be the perfect middle ground policy. We force all women to give birth, and then we kill the baby as soon as it's born. It's the perfect middle ground because the pro-life side gets what they want. They get to, control women's bodies, and then the pro-choice side gets to get what they want, which is to kill a bunch of babies. It's sort of similar to China's policy, except it doesn't have any sex discrimination.
What? I see this as an absolute win.
There's three popular abortion positions, at least that I'm going to be talking about today. That is the conception position, which is just that there is a person at conception. Then there's the consciousness position, which is just that there's a person at consciousness. And then there's bodily autonomy, which just says that persons do not have a right to use your body, even if that means you detaching them from you and killing them. So first I'm going to go through what I think about bodily autonomy, and then I'm going to go over which I think is a better criteria for personhood, that being either conception or consciousness. I don't think the bodily autonomy argument works for most cases of abortion, but I do think that it works in cases of rape. And I'm going to give thought experiments for why I believe both those things. So first, for cases of rape, imagine while you're sleeping, someone connects you to a famous violinist who needs to use your body. You wake up, and you're told that if you disconnect yourself from the violinist, then they'll die. The idea is, if someone is actively using your body to survive, and you didn't consent to being in that situation, should you be legally forced to stay in that situation? To me, it really comes down to how big the burden is that you'd be dealing with. So if you're only going to be connected to them for like 2 minutes, you should probably not be able to disconnect yourself and kill them. But if we make the situation analogous to pregnancy, then I think it exceeds the burden required. If you are forced to be connected to a violinist and the burden that you're dealing with lasts for 9 months, and you're going to be dealing with insane hormone fluctuations and a bunch of sickness, and your body's changing in irreversible ways, and then that whole situation ends with an insanely high medical bill that's followed by like one of the most painful experiences that someone can go through, I think that's probably a big enough burden to where I wouldn't want to legally force somebody to stay connected to the violinist. And so if I don't want to force them to be connected to the violinist, then I don't want to force a woman to be connected to a child in the situation of pregnancy, and thus I think abortion is okay, or at least the bodily autonomy argument works to justify abortion in cases of rape. But if we change the analogy to work for regular situations of pregnancy where you weren't forced into it, then I think the situation is different, and I don't think the argument works. So imagine that you're driving to work. It's 20 minutes away, and normally you would take the highway. But there's invisible mines planted all throughout the road, and you have a general idea of where these mines are, and you can avoid them if you're driving slow, but nothing's guaranteed. And if you happen to run over one of these mines, then instantly a kid becomes attached to you for 9 months. And if you disconnect the kid before that 9-month mark, then the kid will die. You do have an out, so you can take the back roads, which avoid all the mines. You have no chance of running into mines. The only problem is that your route to work now is an hour instead of 20 minutes. The reason this analogy is similar to most cases of abortion is because you don't have to have sex. It's just nice to have sex. In the same way, you don't have to take the short way to work. It's just nice to take the short way to work. And then you can also limit your chances of pregnancy in the same way that you can limit your chances of hitting a mine. But again, nothing's guaranteed. And so in this analogy, I don't think you should probably be able to disconnect yourself from the kid. I think you kind of knew that that could happen by taking that more convenient option, and just because you didn't want to be in that situation, or maybe you could even say that you didn't consent to being in that situation, you knew that it could happen, and thus I think you have some sort of responsibility to that kid, because that kid didn't want to be in that situation, it didn't ask to be in that situation, but you knew that it could happen. And thus I think you bear some level of responsibility, and you probably shouldn't be able to kill the kid, and so in most cases of abortion, I don't think you should be able to get one if you consent, or you knew what was going on, kind of. So now to talk about the criteria for personhood. Under my view, the consciousness criteria I think makes way more sense, because I don't inherently care about life. Instead, I care about life that can feel stuff. So plants are alive, but we don't really care what happens to plants because they can't feel stuff. My dog, on the other hand, can feel stuff, and that's why I care what happens to my dog. We don't typically care about stuffed animals, but in the movie Ted, we do care about how the stuffed animal Ted is treated, and that's because Ted can feel stuff. A common argument for pro-life at conception is that they don't value humans because of what they can do, but they value humans for what they are. That being a distinct, living human organism. I don't think that's a good position, and I'll give an analogy for why I think so. So let's say that we have 1,000 zygotes. That is 1,000 things that are this big, a piece of that dust. Just to explain real quick why I say a zygote is the size of a piece of dust, if you look up online, there's not really information on how big a zygote is on day one, because it more so talks about when it's developing, like during the first stage, which is like a range. But an ovum, which is the thing that the sperm fertilizes with, the sperm cell goes inside of the ovum, meaning that when they two combine with each other to make the single cell, it's only going to be as big as that ovum, because the fertilization completes when the DNA mixes together, and it's like a whole thing. But anyways, essentially the zygote on day one is essentially the size of an ovum cell, and that ovum cell is 120 micrometers, if you look it up on Wikipedia, I'm pretty sure. And a size of dust ranges, because obviously there's different sizes, there's different types of dust and different sizes of dusts that range from different sizes or whatever, but within that range is 120 micrometers. So that's why I say a zygote is a piece of dust, if that was confusing. And we know that they're going to stay alive, they're going to continue living for 70 years, but they're not going to grow at all. They were going to maintain the same size as this piece of dust for their entire life. That is just a single cell zygote, nothing more than that. That's all they're going to be for 70 years. There's 1,000 of them, we know they're not going to die, but you have to make a decision. Either you kill all 1,000 of these zygotes, or you kill a 5-year-old girl. If one singular zygote has the same rights and value as one 5-year-old girl, then 1,000 of them should certainly outweigh one 5-year-old girl. And so you should choose to save the 1,000 zygotes and kill the 5-year-old girl. The problem is that this seems absurd. And the reason I think it seems absurd is because we don't value a zygote the same as one 5-year-old girl. Not only is every single zygote the same size as this piece of dust, but they all each individually have the same experience as this piece of dust. That experience being non-existent. So in that analogy, I think it's pretty clear that we don't really value zygotes, like, at all. It's not even 1,000,000 zygotes are the same as one 5-year-old girl, if those zygotes are going to stay alive, but they're not going to grow at all. And so the reason I think it seems like we value zygotes a little bit, like if you just look at a normal zygote, it seems like we probably would value that. But the reason we value it is only because of its potential to turn into something that we care about, and not because we inherently care about it. But just because we think that something has the potential to turn into something that we care about doesn't mean that we should care about how that thing is treated before it reaches the potential. So you could think of the analogy of a sperm cell that is going to fertilize an egg. It's like, let's say it's 5 minutes away from fertilizing an egg. We know 100% that that is the sperm that is going to fertilize with the egg. They both have, that sperm has the same potential as a zygote. Like, all we need to do is give it some time, and eventually it will turn into this thing that we care about. But it would be strange to say that killing that sperm cell, or like us caring about how that sperm cell is treated, makes a whole lot of sense. Or that even that sperm cell matters more than any sort of living human. Even 1,000 of those sperm cells matter more than any single human being. Like, that doesn't seem intuitively correct. There are other reasons why I think the consciousness criteria is better than conception, and I will let Dustin Crummett explain those. He's a Christian who supports something like the consciousness criteria. It's a little bit different. He calls it the mind instead of consciousness. The idea is, if you are your organism, or are you the mind of your organism?
First argument, roughly, if my mind and my organism part ways, I say I go with my mind, not my organism, so I must be my mind, not my organism. So suppose a case where we take out the part of my brain responsible for my mental life. Suppose that that's my cerebrum, which is plausible, doesn't really matter. We transplant that into a new body and leave this body in a persistent vegetative state. I say that here I would go with my cerebrum, but my organism would not. So this is a description of this from Eric Olson, who is the leading philosophical defender of animalism. Okay. Imagine your cerebrum's put into another head. The being who gets it will have, for the most part anyway, your memories, beliefs, other mental contents and capacities. Your first person perspective will take himself to be you. What about your organism? Will it go along with the cerebrum? No. A detached cerebrum is no more an organism than a detached arm. Or think of the empty-headed thing left behind when the cerebrum is removed. That's an organism. In fact, it may have the lower brain intact, which regulates vital function, so it may well still be alive. It seems to be the same animal that laid down on the table. The comatose being into which my cerebrum is going to be implanted, that's also a living human organism. Presumably, we're not going to kill it by doing this operation. So there appear to be two human animals in the transplant story. One loses its cerebrum, the other gets a cerebrum. The surgeons move an animal from one organ to another, but no animal moves from one head to another. So the conviction that you would go along with your transplanted cerebrum is incompatible with your being an animal. So Eric Olson agrees that he and other animalists have to deny that I go with my cerebrum and instead say that I remain as the brain-dead organism. But I say that's false. I go with my mind, so I am the mind. Second, this will be a shorter argument. If the number of minds in an organism is greater than 1, I say the number of beings like us equals the number of minds, not the number of organisms. So we must be minds and not organisms. So there's a rare type of conjoined twinning called craniopagus parasiticus. You have a head without a body that's attached to a head that does have a body. It seems plausible that the second head is not a separate organism because, again, it doesn't meet scientific criteria for it. But if it has a mind, then I say if there are two different minds here, I say there are two different people here, even though there's only one organism. So we must be minds and not organisms. If we're not sure that there's only one organism, we could imagine a naturally two-headed alien species. This thing develops from a single egg. It's supposed to have 2 heads. Maybe both heads are needed to regulate vital functions. If either dies, the organism will die. Surely that is one organism. But if there are 2 separate minds here, maybe they have an argument or something, then there are 2 different people. Again, Eric Olson agrees a single human organism could have 2 independently functioning brains with its own mental systems. He says he doesn't like the term mind, and so he agrees that, yeah, in some of those cases, animalists have to say there's only one person, even though there are 2 different minds with their own first-person perspectives and so forth. But I say that's false. And if that's false, then we are minds, not organisms.
I'm just going to give one more argument for consciousness over conception. So imagine you have 1 million brain-dead patients that are being kept alive by machines. They're literally just bodies. The lights are on, but no one's home type of deal. So let's say that we're not losing any money by keeping them hooked up to the machines. Like there's no downside to them being hooked up to the machines. They can stay alive indefinitely, no issues. Now let's say you're in a trolley problem where you're given the choice between those million brain dead patients being hooked up to the machines and your best friend's mind that has been uploaded into a hard drive. Let's say that there's no organism or human body. It's just your best friend's conscious mind that is in a hard drive disk. And let's say if your friend survives the trolley problem, then we can just hook their hard drive right back into a human body, and then they'll continue about their life like nothing ever happened. So it seems like the choice here is pretty obvious. You should obviously choose your friend, and the reason is because you aren't choosing your friend or 1 million persons. You're choosing between your friend and 1 million bodies that used to be persons but are no longer persons. So that's my last argument. So my position is that you should be able to get abortions prior to consciousness because there's no person that exists yet. It's just you're only killing an organism that could have become a person but is not yet a person. But after consciousness, I'm only in a favor of abortion in cases of rape. So, and I explained the thought experiment behind that. So, if you have any issues with my position, if you think I'm went wrong anywhere with the way I think about it, let me know down in the comments, and I'll probably respond or make a video about it. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you found this video interesting.